Aloha, friends. Happy Easter, and welcome to my little backyard hut office thingy that I built over these last couple of years. I like to film these things outside, but today the weather is crazy. It's like gale force winds. Not a good day to be filming outside or doing anything with a microphone, especially with my level of technological expertise. So I'm feeling very grateful to have an indoor space to film in, and just want to say welcome. So this is our Easter Sunday talk. It's called The Biology of Becoming. And if you've been riding with the vine for the last few years, you may recall that the focus of the previous three Easter talks has been primarily like a little art history lesson, zeroing in on the differences between the way that the resurrection of Christ is depicted in art in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, iconography, versus how the resurrection of Christ has been depicted in Western art. And it's a pretty drastic difference. Check it out. In nearly all Western art, Jesus is shown emerging from the grave alone. He's victorious, radiant, transcendent. In this particular image, he's also ripped, but decidedly solo. In contrast, nearly all Eastern art of the resurrection, Jesus is not depicted standing outside the grave, but inside it, standing on these shattered gates that represent death, with these little gremlins that represent fear and separateness, bound up at his feet. And these are images of integration, of passing through death, confronting the things that we're afraid of, not running from them, not pretending like they aren't there. And when he does emerge from the grave, unlike in Western art, he's not alone. He's reaching down, holding Adam with one hand and Eve with the other. And behind them is a procession of kings and prophets and peasants and saints, this visual representation of the totality of humanity, marching together out of the mouth of death. If you've ever wondered why you seem to respond so viscerally to the Easter story, why something in you stirs and it feels like this isn't just a story about somebody else, I feel like the Eastern art helps us see that when Jesus stepped out of the grave, so did you. The prominent 20th century theologian, this Swiss fella named Karl Barth, was being interviewed one time, I read, and the interviewer asked him, Mr. Barth, when was it that you became a Christian? And Barth famously replied, 33 AD, which is his way of saying that whatever it is that happened a couple millennia ago, it wasn't something that happened only to Jesus. It's something that happened to all of us, to humanity, to reality itself. In Eastern thought, the resurrection of Christ is the revealing of this great pattern, what's called the universal pattern, that what is truer and deeper and genuinely new emerges only after profound experiences of unraveling. It's like Richard Rohr says, the only things that truly change us, that initiate a process of transformation, are experiences of great love and great suffering. Because in both instances, what is experienced is a loss of control. He also defines suffering. He says, I define suffering as anytime I feel like I'm not in control. But it's a pattern. It's a universal pattern. And we can consciously choose to participate with it by walking through the pain that we're experiencing rather than trying to navigate some way around it. So the Easter story is meant to be a reminder that death isn't the end, that the door that we have labeled death could actually be more accurately labeled new life, that they're the same thing. See, stars are formed along the same pattern. A cloud collapses in on itself and the pressure builds and the temperatures rise, and what looks like full collapse is actually the ignition. I'm pretty sure this is how diamonds are formed. This is true of people as well. Relationships deepen along the same pattern. Something breaks. Disillusionment occurs. And it cuts to the core. And in that cutting to the core, long buried truths are allowed to surface. And if the relationship survives, the old ways of relating really do die. Something new is born. But if it's consciously held, something more real emerges. Leonard Cohen has that great line where he says, ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. And that's how the light gets in. This pattern is also how a life is remade. The old identity that you built to survive stops working, and you unravel. And yet somehow through that unraveling, the truth of who you are begins to show itself. I think sometimes Jesus is called the great physician. I think he could also be called the great psychologist. He observed and named the same pattern, and this is how he said it. He said, "Truly, truly, I tell you, unless a seed falls to the earth and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it multiplies, and in its multiplication it becomes more than it once was. The same is true of you. Whoever clings to their life as it is destroys the very life that they hope to preserve. But if you let that life go reckless in your love, then you'll find a life that is truly life, real life, everlasting." I don't know if you're anything like me. I feel like we usually hear that as poetry, and it is, but it's more than that. It's biology. It's a description of reality. Just picture a seed for a moment. Like if you're holding a little tiny seed in your hand, it doesn't seem like much. Some of them are so small, it's like a little dust speck. And yet the miracle of life, like the totality of the plant that the seed will grow into, is already contained within the seed. Not partially, but completely, the whole thing. But it doesn't look like that. For the truth of the seed to emerge, something has to crack open. And what cracks open at the beginning of the germination process is this little thing called the seed coat. And the seed coat has an important function. It keeps the seed alive, it protects it, it helps it to survive conditions and experiences that would otherwise wipe it out. But in order for new life to emerge, the seed coat has to split and crack open and fall away. And do you know when it does that? It does that when it's time for it to do that. It's kind of amazing that life knows what it's doing. I've read that some seeds can remain ungerminated but alive for thousands of years. Like the lotus seed and the date palm seed can remain sealed up in the seed coat for, I believe the record is right around 2,000 years. 2,000 years waiting for the moment when the conditions are right for new life to emerge. And when the conditions are right, the seed coat cracks open and it falls away. And if you didn't know what you were looking at, if you didn't have somebody to explain that this is the beginning of the germination process and that this is actually a good thing and that something new is going to emerge and that the seed is going to grow into its destiny, and you just saw the thing cracking and splitting and falling away, you would assume that you are looking at failure, collapse, devastation at the end of the road. And Jesus says that the same thing is true of us, that we have our own little seed coat. And these days, we call it the persona or the ego or our coping strategies, our survival systems. The false self, it's called sometimes. And I think it's a fair description, but I also think it's worthwhile to note that, you call it the false self, and it really, the ego really gets a bad rap these days. I spent a better part of a decade trying to kill my ego until somewhere along the way I started to notice that, oh my gosh, this thing is just doing the best. It's just doing the best that it can. There's some part of me that feels so overwhelmed by and sort of scared of the severity of life. And all the ego is life's way of protecting us from situations and circumstances and events that are too big for us to handle. A while back I wrote a teaching called Sympathy for the Ego, because I came to see what I just shared, and I thought, however imperfectly this part of me is going about trying to keep the rest of me safe, it has a protective function, and it's doing the best that it can, and everything belongs. It gets us through childhood. It helps us navigate the first experiences of heartbreak and overwhelm. But at some point, and life knows the way, we come to realize that this thing that once protected us and kept us safe now limits us and has become a prison of its own, something that it's time to outgrow. The problem is that we've fallen in love with it, or we've never looked closely enough to realize that who it is that I think I am isn't the whole picture. It's kind of like that old saying that the mind is a wonderful tool, but a terrible master. The same is true of our persona, our ego, our seed coat. We've grown attached to it. We've fallen in love with it. We can't imagine how we navigate life without it. And so for most of us, we don't leave it willfully because we're bored or we wonder what it might be like to be somebody else. Not all of us are Bob Dylan. For most of us, liberation begins with disruption. And we never quite feel ready for disruption, the germination process looks lovely in these 19th century botanical illustrations, and it sounds profound and important when we read about it in the stories of others or in poetic renderings. But when we're in the middle of it ourselves, it doesn't feel lovely or poetic. It feels like full collapse. I mean, when's the last time that you broke open? Was it clean? Did you think, finally, I can start my memoir? If we put it in biblical terms, we could say we don't often walk victoriously out of Egypt. Rather, we are violently pulled out of Egypt. And the first tastes of freedom can be kind of overwhelming. If you remember in the biblical Exodus story, 400 years of slavery, crying out to God, saying, "When will you deliver us? Save us, save us." They're rescued. They're 40 days in the wilderness. And they flip out. And they say to Moses, "Where are we going? What are the supplies? How do we know that we're going to get there? What am I supposed to do with my day?" It's too abstract. It's too unknown. What are the parameters? They actually said, "Take us back to Egypt." We want to reapply for our old position, because at least there we had 3 square meals and a clear list of expectations. Liberation, freedom, maybe not for everybody, but for many, it's kind of an acquired taste. Like Kierkegaard said, anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. So the heart of this message is Easter, the resurrection, is not only something that happened once long ago. It's something that's happening all of the time. And we can choose to resist it or avoid it or intellectualize it or thank God for it, which also kind of removes us from experiencing it. You remember Jesus never once said, "Worship me." You know what he said? He said, "Follow me." He said, "Pick up your cross and follow me." Consciously participate in this same pattern. But even if we go the conscious participation route, we accept it. We move into it. Confusion abounds. Because, at least in my experience, the seed doesn't go from breaking open to blossoming at a rate that most of us would consider to be acceptable. So, I'm gonna shoot you straight. These last few years have been the most profoundly challenging of my life. Middle age ain't for the faint of heart. And, aside from coloring my truck with paint markers, which was lovingly pointed out to me at the gathering as possibly an expression, my own version of a midlife crisis, because I was thinking, well, look, I didn't get like a long dangling cross earring or a Corvette. I don't know that I've been through a midlife crisis, but I have certainly been through some sort of a passage. I've watched just about every survival strategy and meaning making matrix that I had carefully constructed or inherited be pushed past its limits, pretty well turned to rubble. First I recognized this people-pleasing persona that I had developed to help myself feel safe, this kind of like little wind-up monkey toy song and dance man that I had mistaken to be myself. Stage one was realizing that wasn't the totality of who I am. Stage two was realizing that I had already pushed it past its breaking point. But the problem was, it's how I navigated the world. And it's how I handled the responsibilities that I'd been tasked with. And it lost its juice, and I lost my ability to participate with it long before any new way of navigating life's challenges emerged. Relationships that I had considered essential to my survival just fell apart, or at least were profoundly disrupted and in need of reorganizing. The theology that had been working just fine took me as far as it could, and then just suddenly stopped working. The inconsistencies, the incongruencies just kind of piled up until I was at a point where I realized if I'm going to continue to believe these things, I'm going to have to make myself believe them. And then I realized that there's a term we have for this, and it's called make-believe. And I thought, that doesn't seem healthy. I remember for a little while I thought, well, there are still a few things I still believe, and maybe if I can hang on to these just couple of things, I can ride it out till I die and get into heaven still. I met my shadow, and it freaked me out. And I quickly realized that there is a reason why we suppress some of these instincts and impulses and pretend like they aren't there. It's been challenging, and yet the whole time I've known that it is a good thing. And I've, done my imperfect best to consciously participate, to take the teachings of Jesus seriously, to be open to the presence of Christ within me, to be guided and led, to accept that suffering is a part of life, and that the opposite of faith, or the opposite of belief, isn't doubt, it's certainty. And my certainties were challenged. And on my best days, I have recognized that that's a gift. But here's the thing, here's the bone I have to pick with reality. And it's just this, that while all of that full collapse was happening, life was also happening. That the responsibilities didn't disappear, and that the challenges didn't sort of like slowly taper off so I could integrate what had just happened. It was like it just kept coming. For a little while there, somebody'd say, how's life right now? And I'd say maximum. It's overflowing. Good, bad, and otherwise. I remember at one particular moment of peak overwhelm, I had a spiritual direction session scheduled, and so I sat down with my director and was trying to process through these things, and I just asked her, like, look, I don't know, do you have any good recommendations for like a cave, just a cave somewhere where I could maybe just hide out for 6 or 7 years, and I don't know, I may have like some sort of a spiritual master who could explain what exactly is happening to me. And she said no, that she didn't have a good cave recommendation. And then she asked me, do you like your life? Like, is this the life that you want to be living? And I thought of it, and I answered her honestly, and I said, yes, but not like this, not with this much intensity. And she said, you need to figure out what each day's minimum required tasks for survival is, what it actually is. And you need to give yourself the grace to do just that and nothing more. Because you're in a process and you can't force the bud to blossom. And I realized that she was saying that just how much like nitrogen I've been blasting my awakening with, trying to accelerate the process by understanding it so that it would take the pain away. I went on such a book buying bender that Jess, my wife, at one point said, "Bobby, no more books. No more books." Aren't all the books, the majority of them were around the contemplative path in Christianity, whose core tenet is silence. And she was like, "How many more explanations of silence do you need?" Slowly, I began to make peace with the reality that a process had begun by way of circumstances and situations that I did not choose. A process that was continuing, whether I wanted it to or not. It's it's called being born again. And I've never given birth to a child, as far as I know. But it does appear to me that once the childbirth process is initiated, it's seen through. You can't turn it back off. And I want to close this little chat as practically as I can with something like field notes from a protracted rebirth. Because in my experience, it can be difficult to tell what's actually happening in the long stretch between cracking open and breaking through. And as much as I'd like to glamorize the process, in my experience, it's been filled with questions like, are we there yet? How long is this going to take? And more honestly, with days and weeks where I wondered, is anything even happening? There were long stretches of time where the best I could do was try to show up to life. I think we call that like survival mode. And that's a difficult place to live from because functionally it just feels like disillusionment, sorrow, and just like getting through the day. And beyond that, it's like this daily reminder of how little control we actually have. And I don't know how pronounced and authoritative your inner controller is, but mine apparently was strong enough that it took this long for it to finally make peace with letting go. Being cared for, being carried. If we stay with our metaphor of the germination process, the seed goes through something similar. When the germination process begins and the seed coat cracks and falls away, the next stage 2, is not a shoot breaking through the earth. What happens is the seed coat splits, cracks, falls away, and then it becomes the nutrients that feed the roots. The next step is roots begin to form. And the roots are forming underground, below conscious perception, and the same is true of us. And miraculously, beautifully, the seed coat, when it splits and falls away, its job isn't done. It breaks down and it becomes the nutrients, it becomes the food that feeds the root system, that allows the shoot to break through the earth. And I think that this is a beautiful expression of the reality that God doesn't waste our pain. Just because you are no longer who it was that you once thought you were, and that version of yourself made all kinds of mistakes, that during the breakdown period, they come so furiously to mind. Like, maybe this is my fault. Maybe what was the point of any of that? I can't believe that it's all like the past was not a waste. And God doesn't waste our pain. So just like the seed develops roots below conscious perception, the same thing is happening in us in this period where we may ask, like, what is anything even really happening? Well, down there below the surface, there are a few things happening. And this is in no way an exhaustive list. These are just a few things that I've noticed along my own process. First, the nervous system is recalibrating. We learn slowly to live without the constant stimulation that causes our life to move at a rate that is profoundly unhealthy. There simply isn't enough energy left to keep moving at that speed. Our world shrinks. We set down the things that we can't carry anymore. Life simplifies. Second, our identity is under construction, and that seems like kind of a big job. We aren't any longer who it is that we thought we were, but we also have no idea who it is that we might be becoming. And it feels like confusion, but it's also liberating. The sorrow and the tears are a means of excavating our insides, of creating space for something deeper and more true to emerge. This third kind of unconscious process that is occurring is that the past is integrating. Because without the energy to engage in the constant stimulation, you just don't have the juice anymore to go here and to do this and to be me and to perform in this way. There just isn't the energy for it. And so we lose some of the engagement that we're accustomed to, but at least in my case, I started to notice that how much of that engagement was actually just a distraction to keep me busy from having to feel what it is that I was actually feeling. And when it all slowed down enough and I dropped into that ache of loss, it was profound. And I'm reminded that Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Because if we avoid the mourning, then we also avoid the comfort that waits for us within the mourning. And lastly, the controller, the part of us that really wants to believe that we are capable enough to handle whatever it is that we're facing. That part of us finally learns surrender. But that part of us is always sort of measuring and comparing and analyzing and projecting. And I noticed that it was really unhealthy to continue to measure the quality of my life by how I feel about my life. Because the feelings in this stage are heavy. And so if I stopped measuring how I felt about this moment or about this arc or about my life as a whole, and instead I just looked at the content of my experience as it actually stood. No past, no future, no value. I saw that beauty and confusion grow together. And that right here, right now, there is connection and there is presence and there is enough. There is enough for right now. Consider the lilies of the field just feels functionally better than asking, how do I feel about my life right now? And life, the newness, it doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in slant through just small moments of connection, with my kids. Some like genuine laugh that comes out of me that surprises me. How unspeakably beautiful the color green is and how much God must love that color. Stay in contact with what is quietly alive, even if it seems small and fragile. Because the part of you that can notice the beauty, that can notice the life, is the part of you that is alive. It is the sprout. Nothing is happening outside the process. These moments of contentedness are not outside the work. They are the work. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, a shoot breaks through the surface. This is the Easter story. This is the resurrection. This is the universal pattern. Life returns differently. Nothing and no one is ever really gone. It's just rearranged. The mystery continues, and the exploration will not cease. But what begins to be graciously absent is the intensity and the urgency to solve life, because a solved life is a reduced life. And the truth of who we are, your true self, it's not like another version of yourself that we can somehow meet. I don't know what I was anticipating. Like eventually, I would just be, I don't know, like Jesus would be like, all right, Bobby, here's your true self. And I'd be like, oh, that true self seems pretty cool. I guess I'll let him take it from here. Like, I don't know what the truth of who we are, just real life, it remains a mystery. Not even the Bible itself tries to pin it down in clear terms. And that's actually where I'll conclude this thing, with St. Paul's reflection on our true self. And this is how he put it. He said, "Your old life is dead. Your new life, which, by the way, is your real life, even though it's invisible to spectators, the truth of who you are, is hidden with Christ in God." Christ is your life. As Christ, who, again, is your life, shows up on this earth whenever those moments break through, then you show up too. The real you. So, in the meantime, just be content with obscurity, just like Jesus. All right. I think that's it for today. Thank you. Thanks for being here. And also, if you're a part of this community, I also just want to say thank you for the grace that's been extended to me and to my family throughout this whole process, and here especially in this last 6 months to a year. The understanding and the support and the lack of like intense need or demands has meant it's meant more to me than I can say. So thank you for being here and for being you. Love yous. See you around.